Hey there, if you enjoy my work, please take a moment to like the video. I need your help if I'm going to resurrect this channel. A child's imaginary friend may have been more than just make-believe. Dear Mr. X, my name is Angel. I'm writing to tell you the story of my son's imaginary friend. I'm now a 32-year-old woman living with my son Eric. He's now 17. If you do the math, you'll see that I had my son very early on in life. In a strange way, we really grew up together. The events I'm about to describe all happened when he was 3, almost 4 years old. I had recently separated from Eric's father, my then husband, and moved back in with my dad. We lived in an old hunting cabin out in eastern Kentucky. It was a pretty decent setup, all things considered. It was hard adjusting at first, but, you know, life has a way of moving on. At least we had all the necessities. One day, out of the blue, Eric came into my room and I happened to ask him what he'd been up to.
Playing with Donny,
he said casually. We didn't know anyone named Donny. I tried to imagine who he might have been talking about. I'm sure you know how kids can sometimes mispronounce names. The more I thought of it, though, I realized no one we knew had a name even similar to Donny. Before I got too worried in my overprotective young motherly brain, I reminded myself that kids have their little imaginary friends sometimes. I'm sure I even had one or two of my own just a few short years prior. So with that in mind, I sort of let it slide at the time. A few days later, Eric started talking about Donny again. My ears twitched with a bit of curiosity as he came up to me smiling. I asked him where Donny lived, and his answer, honestly, left me shaken.
Donny crawls up in the walls. I think he lives in the ceiling.
More than a little creeped out, I asked another question. Well, what does he look like? Without skipping a beat, he replied.
He has big teeth, and he wears makeup.
What the fuck? The words almost slipped out in front of my son. They echoed in my ears, as a visceral sense of dread came over me. I had no choice but to insist silently to myself that this was all in his imagination. I just couldn't imagine where he could possibly have gotten something so crazy. As time passed, I began to notice Eric's feelings about Donny changing. He seemed to regard him less and less as a friend. Eventually, things took a dramatic turn for the worse. One day, Eric came up to me and said,
"I'm gonna kill Donny."
That was the first time he'd ever said anything so violent. I scolded him a bit, telling him he should never say terrible things like that. The whole situation was legitimately beginning to scare me. I kept telling myself that it was just a silly imaginary friend, that it would all be fine. But deep down, somewhere, I knew that was a lie. Things were relatively quiet for a few months. It was Christmas time. Eric was almost 4 and we hadn't heard the name Donny in quite a while. I assumed he simply forgot about his so-called imaginary friend. My cousin Theo came to stay with us for the holiday, and we all got really caught up in the spirit of the season, even staying up late on Christmas night. Eric was so excited about his new toys. He didn't want to stop playing with them. It was about 1 a.m. by the time we finally all decided to go to bed. I laid my head on my pillow, exhausted from all the fun times, teetering on the edge of sleep. I could see out into the hallway as my eyelids grew heavier by the second. I noticed low, flickering light coming from my cousin's room. My first thought was that he must have been smoking, which got me a little upset. I reluctantly geared myself up to get back out of bed and tell him he shouldn't be smoking in the house. As I forced myself to sit up, the light began to get brighter. Before I could say anything,
"Oh my God!"
my cousin's voice rang out in the hallway.
"The kitchen's on fire!"
Within seconds, the sounds of feet pounding on the hardwood floors filled the air. I snapped out of the grogginess of sleep and went straight into mama bear mode. I grabbed Eric by the elbow along with a laundry basket full of dirty clothes as we ran outside. It felt like hours had passed before the local firemen responded. I guessed that being such a small town, there weren't a lot of people on duty for Christmas night that year. My dad, Theo, Eric and I sat in an empty field across the street and watched our house burn down to its foundation. With the orange glow of the flames flickering on his face, Eric looked up at me and said,
Donny started the fire, but Jesus saved us.
I stared down at him in silence, having no idea what to think or say.
Donny died in the fire, Mommy. Did you see?
I was floored. My heart sank and a nauseous wave washed over me from head to toe. Eric hadn't mentioned Donny in weeks. My family actually never spoke much about Jesus, or anything religious really. We were technically Christian by default, I guess, but I had no clue where Eric could have possibly come up with something like that. After a few seconds of visible bewilderment, I just agreed. Yes, baby, I saw. Tears rolled down my cheeks, stinging in the freezing cold night air. Over the years, I've grown to believe that my Eric may have truly seen things that we could not see. If you ask him now, he doesn't remember a thing about Donny. He doesn't remember the fire either, any of it. In fact, as Eric grew older, he developed an intense fear of anything paranormal. I, on the other hand, will never forget. I promise you this story is 100% true, Mr. X. We moved into the city after spending 2 months going from hotel to hotel. It was a nightmare, but I was glad I at least grabbed that one basket of clothes. Something told me not to leave it behind, and it ended up being the only possessions we had left for a while after the fire. Anyway, thanks for listening, and for sharing my story. Sincerely, Angel. Another classic story. I totally revamped the language of it for the purposes of this video. And at the time, I read it live with an audience of dreamers. We'll get to their comments in just a minute. But first, a couple thoughts from me. So many people believe that children may be able to sense things that others cannot. That as we grow older, our connections to the other side, whatever that may be, seem to wane. I often wonder how true this is. Could Eric's imaginary friend have been just that, and maybe something else caused a mysterious fire in the house? Or could Donny have really been responsible? Could he have been something more than just a figment of Eric's imagination? What do you think brought about Eric's sudden ill wishes toward his former pal? What drove the mysterious Donny to put the entire family in danger, changing the course of their lives forever? I leave these questions and many more to you, my friends. If you have anything to add, drop a comment down below. You know I read them all. Now let's see what the dreamers had to say about this fascinating story. Zucker agrees that children seem to see things that we don't, that they have maybe sixth sense that most of us lose as we grow older. Sgt Moe is of the same opinion. She also threw in that Donny is probably a demon. A fair guess, I would say, if there is such a thing. Brett said, I'm wondering if those teeth were like vampire teeth, or full-on every tooth is sharp. Interesting thing to pick up on there, Brett. I'm thinking human teeth would be the most terrifying iteration of that if I had to imagine a design for this bizarre Donny character. I don't know what's really scarier, human teeth or vampire teeth. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Brian's World says, question, could this be some sort of incubus-related entity? And I remember during the live discussion, we actually spoke about that. Maybe consider the idea that imaginary friends could be like a larval form of these parasitic entities like incubus or succubus. Very interesting and haunting thing to consider. Leann was wondering why the son said Jesus saved them, other than the idea that he's probably at least vaguely aware, being that the family was Christian by default, as Angel said. And I wonder that as well. I mean, who knows what type of education he had or what types of things were, programmed into his mind as far as his expectations of when good things happen, what might be the reasoning behind it. But who's to say, really? Jerry Hernandez says, perhaps Donny wanted Eric to go with him somewhere, and Donny's aggressiveness was a response to Eric's reluctance and to go with him. Maybe that upset Donny and caused him to start the fire. Just considering it and talking about it in that way sort of creeps me out, as if we're legitimately talking about a creature that's got feelings and motivations. And yeah, the more we acknowledge that, the stranger it feels to me. Very interesting though. So remember, if you want a chance to have your question or comment show up in a future video and have a chance to sponsor the channel with a super chat, turn on notifications so you can catch the live readings and discussions. And don't forget to stay tuned to the very end of the video to see the sponsors' names on the screen. This show is sponsored by dreamers like you, if you didn't know. So, before I let you go, if I could extract a moral from this story, it would be this. No matter how strange your child's words might be, it's probably a good idea to investigate when they say something alarming or disturbing. You never know what you may discover with a few well-placed questions. Not that you would unmask a wall-crawling, lipstick-wearing fire starter, but one never knows, do one? That'll do it for this story, my friends. If you're still listening, today's code word is lipstick. Type it in a comment down below so I can see you. Take care, my friends. The Mr. X Dreams Show is now sponsored by dreamers like you. This week's episode was sponsored by Ambar Chavez, Dark Waters, Dezombified, Ice Cube, Leann, Lorie Long, MulleM, Sgt Moe, Shinfitz, Teresa Lease, Terico Tomoso, Timdawg 09, Xochitl Gonzalez, Zen 2011, and Zucker Schnecke. Thank you all very much. All right. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, don't forget to like and share. If you made it to the very end, you're exactly the kind of subscriber I'm looking for. Don't forget to turn on those notifications. That way, you can catch the live show and discuss the stories with me. Your input might even appear in my next video. Last thing, if you heard a code word after the story, type it in a comment down below so I know who the real dreamers are. Take care, my friend. Until next time.